In order to assemble your AAP01 PCC kit here, you will of course need to have the kit itself. You will also need to have an AAP01. I've got a nice fresh AAP01 here, but let's put that to the side for now. We'll be using this later. The PCC kit comes like this. There's both black and FDE, flat dark earth, aka sand color, if you will, variations. To open it up, you of course put down the tabs here, boom, and then take off this first layer of foam. Here we've got our instructions, which give you a basic overview of what's in it, and then also based upon this, you can assemble it. But some details may not be that clear to people, so I'm going to go through it all in detail. So you'll also see here the details of how the TTC Hopup system works using the stock Hopup unit. And then, of course, an image of the whole thing in the end, noting, of course, that the handguard stock and the barrels are all optional. So there's two parts here. Up top, you will have your stock adapter, along with your needed screws and such at the bottom. The stock adapter here, you'll see it has threading on the inside for GBB style stocks. Probably a little bit hard for you to see in the dark here. And then on the outside here, this is for AEG style stocks. And you can actually remove the AEG style stock portion out this way if you need to by taking out this screw. I'll show you that in detail later when we do the stock installation. And this, of course, is the main body. This is a really nicely made full CNC main body that completely replaces the upper receiver of the AAP01. It also incorporates, as you see here, a wheel, which controls a TTC hop. Essentially what that does here is you move it and it presses this guy down bit by bit. This is more than enough to give you, if anything, too much hop. The adjustment range for this is actually really, really wide. And I'll show you that in detail later. Taking our fresh new AAP01 here, I'm just going to take off the sticker real briefly, get that out of the way. And the first thing you want to do is you want to take off the upper receiver. It can be a little bit stiff at first. And take it off like that. So later on, we're going to be taking all the internals from this and transferring them over to the PCC kit upper. For the time being though, let me just show you how this kind of fits on. You can fit this like so. This barrel adapter here, as it comes, is perfectly spaced to be the same length as the stock upper. So you can use the stock inner barrel here and it will go right to the end here as a reference point. So while we have the empty upper on, I also want to show off kind of the advantages of having a nice CNC receiver like this and how nice quality this really is. You'll see here there's no gap here at all. There's some other sort of upper receivers out there for the AAP01 that are, it's the AAP01 aftermarket in its earliest stages sort of. Some of them have some gaps here and they're not perfectly fitted, but the dimensions of this one are perfect. You can tell that, of course, the manufacturer took the time to make this really, really well made. So let's take this guy off, and then we're going to show you how to put in all the required internals into this upper here. First, we need to get the stock internals out in the first place, and to do that we need to take out some screws from the rear sight, which holds the bolt in here, and then these two screws here, which hold in this guy. Once you have the screws for the rear sight out, you take off the rear sight, and then you can pull the bolt straight out. Then we flip it over, take out the screws for here. Once you have those screws out, this whole assembly will come out. Then further, we have a couple smaller screws here that attach this outer barrel to the Hopup unit. We'll also have to take those off. And then you'll be able to pull it right out. There will be a little bit of resistance because you have this O-ring up front, but it should pull out no problem. And here we have our inner barrel and Hopup unit. Now we're going to take the inner barrel and Hopup assembly, and we're going to swap out some parts here so that the stock Hopup can be used with the TTC Hopup here on the upper receiver of the carbine kit. We're also going to swap out this inner barrel here for a longer one because, of course, we're making a carbine one of the advantages is you can have a nice long inner barrel and get a lot of power if you want to. That is one thing you do need to keep in mind. This is an example of a 200 millimeter barrel in an AAP01 hop-up. 200 millimeters is a fairly common length for AAP01 hop-ups because this is the length that fits in, for example, the AAC's own handguard, and a lot of people make these 200 millimeter barrels, especially for the AAP01. You can, of course, go even longer, and I am actually going to put a really long barrel in. You do have to keep in mind the AAP01 shoots pretty hot. So if you put in a barrel like this, or the even longer barrel I'm going to put on, you're going to see that you're going to generate a lot of power. And depending upon your field and its limits, that may be too much. So do keep that in mind. In addition to that, we need to keep in mind the length of the inner barrel as we consider the build we're making. Of course, a carbine build we're going to make, and we're going to have a handguard out to here. You may or may not want to have an inner barrel that's all the way out here. You may, for power's sake, so it's not too powerful, you may actually want to have your inner barrel a fairly bit shorter than your outer barrel and handguard. A lot of people like the sort of recessed outer barrel, and then you have like a tracer sticking out or something of those sorts. Lots of different patterns there. But to give you an idea of the calculation involved here, the stock barrel, which is really 129 millimeters, but we're going to round it off and call it 130 millimeters for calculation's sake, goes up to here. So keep in mind that whatever barrel you have, you can minus 130 millimeters, and that will tell you how much it sticks out from the end of this. But what's maybe more useful, you should know that these threads here are about 10 millimeters. So when you're choosing an outer barrel extension, for example, and you're looking for a barrel to match, if you want your inner barrel to match your outer barrel, which is to say have the inner barrel go just the end of the outer barrel, when choosing your outer barrel, you'll want to take your desired inner barrel length and subtract 120 from it. For example, this is, as mentioned, a 200 millimeter inner barrel setup. Let's see if I can get this guy in here. I'm setting up so it's the holes are where they are, not actually screwed in at the moment. So as is calculated, this inner barrel is 200 millimeters. And as we just said, you want to have this minus 120 millimeters will be the length between the end of this outer barrel, except for the threads, and the end of your inner barrel. And we can check that and see that here indeed, the length between the bottom of this threading and the end of the inner barrel is indeed about 80 millimeters. So if I wanted to have, for example, an outer barrel extension that matched this exactly and had this inner barrel right to the end, I'd want one that was 80 millimeters. It can be a little hard to find outer barrel extensions that match exactly the inner barrels you want, and of course there's a variety of inner barrel lengths, so you may need to consider your combination before you start buying parts for this. To visualize here, for example, here is an outer barrel extension on there, and I'm going to line up these screw holes here with the screw holes there, and you can see here even this 200 millimeter barrel really has a lot of extra room for this basic outer barrel length. So you really have to kind of consider the length of the various parts you get, and also the length of the handguard. The length of the handguard, by the way, you should consider that the handguard is going to go right up against this railing, right? So considering that, and considering where the handguard is, the length between the rails here, where your handguard is going to go up against, in reality there's usually a gap, you'll see this a little bit later, and then the end of this outer barrel mount here is 58 millimeters. Let's call it 60 to make it easy. So basically you want your handguard, which is going to go from here all the way out to wherever you want it, to be the length of your chosen outer barrel extension plus about 60 millimeters. This is a little complicated. There's a bunch of figures here. I will throw up a screen with the basics of this calculation to give you a rough guideline for how long your outer barrel extension should be, your handguard should be, and your inner barrel should be. Going back to the stock hop-up unit and how you want to change it in order to use the TTC, we're going to bust out our bag of stuff here we got, and we're going to pull out this, the TTC hop lever, if you will. This is the holder for the hop nub. This is a screw which will hold on that lever, and then finally the little stock nub itself. So you'll need to fully disassemble the hop-up unit in order to take a few things apart. And we're going to undo the 4 Phillips head screws that hold the hop-up unit together. Boom. And now we have our hop-up unit in 2 parts here. The next thing we need to do in order to install the TTC hop-up is we're also going to take apart the wheels here, because we'll no longer be using these stock hop-up wheels. We will instead be using the external TTC hop-up wheel. So what we've removed here are the hop dials here. There's 2 of them. They act like a gear. And then the screw that held it on, the O-ring, and then also the hop arm here for stock hop-up. And we're not going to use any of these. Put these aside in case you want to use them again in a different build at some point, but we don't need them for now. Now we also have here our stock barrel, and as a reminder, I did take the O-ring off a while back. Put that over here for now. And also has the stock AAC hop-up rubber. Black on black, very hard to see, but it is here. I'm going to take the hop-up rubber off. A little bit of oil on this. You might want to take the opportunity to clean off some of the oil as you're doing this, in case it's too oily there. The barrel I'm going to swap in is going to be a pretty long one that is going to give me some pretty spicy shooting. This is Unicorn Airsoft, which makes some nice inner barrels, and each inner barrel also comes with a hop-up rubber, though in this case I'm actually not going to use the hop-up rubber, and I'll tell you why in a moment. This is going to be quite long. This is going to be a proper carbine build. You will see just how much power I develop with a barrel this long. Unicorn Airsoft is also, personally, I think, pretty nice for these sorts of AAP uses, because all of their barrels also have a cutout here at the end for an O-ring. So we're actually going to get some use out of the stock O-ring here, most likely. Depending upon your build, you may or may not want that. It also may or may not fit your chosen outer barrel extension, but it is nice to have the option there. And then you put this back into your hop-up base, sticking the protrusion here on our hop-up rubber into the hole over here. Should slide into place nicely. This is a little bit hard to manage because it's so long and heavy on one side. And then we're going to screw these guys in, except we won't be screwing in this one, but screw in all the others. So we won't be screwing this last one, and we'll be taking it out. Make sure it comes all the way out here, because we're going to be replacing it with this, because this will become the pivot for the TTC hop arm there. The TTC hop arm, you simply take the arm and then you put the little nub here, or nub holder rather, and stick it in like that. And you stick the nub in inside of there. A little bit hard to see perhaps, but then you see you have the, try and pop this guy out a little bit. You have the nub holder sticking like this with the concave part down here. And we'll take this, and then this nub and stuff will fall out if we flip it over. So we're going to instead flip this over like so, then stick this in. So when you have it correctly assembled, it will look like this. Sorry, it's very hard to see. It's black on black here, not the best of light. There you go. See, like that. Let me hold this in with this long silver screw that we have, which replaces the original screw from the hop-up unit. Like so. And then we can, of course, take this and put this into our upper, and it will leave a lot of exposed inner barrel until we put some outer barrel extensions on it. It comes in, you line up the screw holes, and then you, of course, put your screws back in, which you've hopefully put aside and not lost. And here we go. You see here, this is fairly long inner barrel. Now that we have this set up like this, this TTC hop will affect the hop going up or down like so. Which, by the way, when you're installing this, you will need to make sure that your TTC hop is probably, it's best to have it all the way off, because this little thing does stick down and that could impede the insertion of your hop-up unit. So going back a little bit, you may recall I said that I'm not going to use the hop that came with the Unicorn barrel. This is the Unicorn hop. A lot of people like them. They're very good, I think. But notice this. Look at how much of a protrusion there is there for the hop nub on this hop-up rubber. It goes way down there, which for a lot of purposes is going to be quite good. There's a problem here when you use this with this TTC hop. And let me show you what that is. This will also serve as a demonstration of the TTC hop-up function. Right now I'm looking down the barrel here, and I'm turning, this hop-up is off right now all the way, and I'm turning it on. This will show you what it looks like. You see here at the top of the barrel, the little nub is coming down there. However, the TTC hop-up has a lot of adjustment range. For example, this, if you max it out, that is a ton of protrusion from the top there. This is enough to potentially cause issues and even block a BB from firing. If you do this, plus the Unicorn hop-up nub, which actually has even more of a protrusion there on the top, this will actually block literally about half of the barrel if you accidentally leave it on. It will hop a ton. And if you leave that on and you accidentally leave your hop-up on max and you fire the carbine here, you will block your barrel. And you will not be able to get the BB out without getting a rod and shoving it down, and it will be a big pain in the butt. And you'll probably be out of action for whatever game you were playing. So do keep in mind that the TTC hop-up, it's great to have this functionality. It's great to be able to adjust the outside. If you don't pay attention and you accidentally have it on too high, there's such an adjustment range that you can actually potentially jam your gun if you're not careful. One other thing to note, because I know some people will ask, is you can actually use the AAC CNC hop-up, which is this, on the PCC carbine kit. What happens here is that, of course, it's closed and it's a carbine kit, and you'll see this later, but you can't easily open it up to adjust it like you normally would. But if you stick this in the carbine kit, essentially what happens is that the TTC nub there that presses down, it basically presses here. And what it does is it ultimately mimics the function of the wheel here. So you can actually fit this in. It's kind of expensive and not too much advantage over the hop-up here, but I know some people that say they feel that they get a much better air seal from the CNC hop-up. So if you have one around, or you want to spend the money and you don't mind not having this nice clicking functionality, this will actually, insofar as I've seen, work in the PCC carbine kit. I've yet to actually run a game with this, so we'll see if there's some unforeseen problem, but in all my tests it seems to function perfectly fine. Well, it just the TTC hop-up presses this arm down like this, and you get sort of normal hop from that. So you do seem to be able to use the CNC hop-up if you so want. A little bit expensive considering you lose most of the functionality, and you can do basically the same thing with a stock hop-up, but it is an option. So once you have your outer barrel and things in place, normally what you do with the pistol build is you would then put in your bolt, and then you would put in your rear sight, and that would hold in your bolt, and you're good. In this case, however, we want to put that part on sort of last, because you need to put that on along with the rear here, the stock adapter, because this nub here is what holds the bolt in once you put this on. So for the time being, we're going to go and do the rest of the forefront here and show you how to put that on. In my case here, I've got quite the long inner barrel. I happen to have a couple, this is actually a smaller outer barrel extension and a large outer barrel extension, and between the two, they work pretty well to give me about the right length I need. It may be a little hard to track down outer barrel extensions that are exactly the right length, and then if you have too many, it might be a little funky and have maybe some droop if you have a bunch of angles here, depending upon how good the threading is on these. But for me, at least, this one seems to work okay. The inner barrel is a little bit recessed there, but not so much to be a problem. So I have this set up like this. This is just a basic screw on here if you're using this stock outer barrel adapter. You can also use other outer barrel adapters, and let me show you how. If you want to use another outer barrel adapter, the outer barrel adapter here is held on by 2 grub screws here on the front and the back. This allows you to take off this portion here. This part here is held on by the grub screws here. As you can see, I've already done some testing. It's a little bit torn up from being held by the grub screws, but it is what it is. This means that you can indeed use different adapters if you want to. If, for example, you find one that fits with a better length, there are 3 cutouts here, and you need to find something that fits in there, like so. You should be able to use a wide variety, I believe this is for AEGs, a wide variety of AEG or also GBVR adapters here. For these types, for example, actually you won't use the grub screws. There's nothing for the grubs to grip on there because it's actually recessed here. Well, I guess this one maybe you could just screw on. This one, there's nothing for the grub screw to get to. It will be held on by the barrel nut of the handguard, which we will see later when we install that. So with my outer barrel adapter here back on, I'm now going to put on my handguard of choice. And I'll show you the handguard that I'm using for my personal build and also a couple of other examples of handguards because there's a variety of ways in which handguards attach here. The basics of it is that most handguards you're going to do is you're going to have a barrel nut that goes on like this and then screws on. You screw it all the way in. You'll see here there's a bit of a gap. Some of that will be taken up by the handguard. You will see in a moment. Now, the difficulty here, of course, is depending upon your handguard, there's different levels of sensitivity. But basically the handguard screws in. You see I have 2 screws here. I need to line them up with here. Let me put this on here, like so. And then you'll see this sort of handguard has a couple of nubs here. And the nubs are supposed to lock in here at the top. And between screwing in here and not being able to twist because of these nubs, your handguard will stay on secure. Now the issue is, you can't see all that well because it's black on black. You can see it better here, is that of course these holes don't line up. So you need the holes to line up and you need this nut to be nice and tight, which presents a little bit of a problem. The answer to said problem is basically these, which are little spacers, which should come with any nice handguard set that requires them. Depending upon your handguard set, you may or may not get that many or enough or the right size perhaps. You may need to source some of your own. But basically what these do is these fit on down over here, right? And by fitting on there, they essentially change where your barrel nut and thus these screws are going to lie while this is all the way tightened in. So there's a little bit of trial and error involved here. From previous experimentation, I believe that this one I'm going to need 2 of these guys. I think probably the plastic side should be on the... These are metal and plastic, I believe. Plastic gives you a little bit of give. I believe I should be going in like this. I'm going to screw these in. Screw this in nice and fairly taut. And we'll see how that lines up and if it's close enough. Looking pretty close, but not quite. So it needs to be a little bit tighter. It's not going to happen with this. So I think I need to actually take one off. I'll do just the plastic one. Screw this guy all the way in. That's looking pretty good. Tighten it down a little bit and see where we are. Now this is pretty close. I'm going to untighten this a little bit to line those holes up and see how it feels. So with a little bit of off-camera trial and error, I got this here to where you can see it fits nicely and the screws are lined up there. So there you go. Once I lined up the screws, I was able to put this in and now we have it and it's nice and secure in there. We have a nice little handguard added on here. I have this intentionally recessed down here so I can add in a recessed tracer, if you will, like this Ace-Tech Bifrost. Another good Taiwanese company here. And you get this pretty cool recessed look like that. This handguard, by the way, is from a Taiwanese company called Hao and is the FLR handguard. This is a 9.7 inch. They also have a longer one, I think 13.5 or so, 13.7. It is, in my mind, super cool. I think just the machining here looks super awesome as it kind of catches the light a little bit. It gives a really nice reference point in this grip area, and it is overall a really, really well made, nice handguard. But of course, the negative is that it is a little bit difficult and takes a little bit of trial and error to put this screw on. I wanted to show this one to give an example and to show how you might need to use the spacers and to show this style of handguard where it locks in at the top here. Now I'm going to show you a different handguard, which is a little bit easier. It is a URGI style handguard, which is a bit easier to fit on and requires a little bit less trial and error. So now we've taken our handguard back off, and I'll show you how to put on a different style of handguard. Still fairly similar in that it uses the barrel nut like this, and you go and you simply put that on. This is going to be for a URGI style handguard replica here. Put that on, and then you put this guy on over here. This is a nice tight fit. And then what's going to go on here is I'm going to push this down, and basically this screw just goes through here and locks it in that way. Of course, at the same time, it also locks in a bit up here and also has some grub screws down here to make it tight. Now, unfortunately, for most of these, I'm pushing this down, by the way, to find wherever it is. That is that little notch. There we go. And this goes in like this. I unfortunately don't have a star wrench that's big enough for that, but I'm going to use the flathead on this other side to tighten these dudes up. And like that, once you've tightened that a bit, it's going to prevent it from coming out. But of course, there's still a bit of little play here because, you know, the way this locks in stops from going out forward, but it allows it to rotate a bit. So for that, we need to use these grub screws. You want to make sure it's lined up as you're doing this, and you may take a little bit of trial and error to get it right. Because you see, if you do one too far, it will push it to the side. Like so. This probably would need fine tuning, but for demonstration purposes, it's good enough. And once you put them in a little bit, you can tighten them up one by one to get a nice tight fit. You may want to go to the hardware store and source some slightly shorter grub screws so you don't have that sticking out. If these got jammed with mud or if these got bent or something, it would be a pain in the butt. But long story short is you also have this sort of handguard that works quite well. And once you have the grub screws on, it's super solid. A little bit easier than the other style where you have to do a little bit of trial and error and line up your screw holes there. Anyway, I can't show you every single kind of handguard you're going to have here, but just keep in mind, generally speaking, most of them will screw in here somehow. They'll have a nut, and then they will have a nut essentially that stops the handguard from coming out this way, and then they'll have some way of stabilizing either up here, down here, or some of them actually will have some protrusion that goes in this hole here. The specific sizing of things might be a little bit difficult. You do need to keep in mind the dimensions. Another dimension you need to keep in mind is actually this part here is 24.47, 24.5-ish millimeters wide, which is actually on the wide side. For example, this is a separate barrel nut. You'll see here, this one like just barely fits over here. I did try some barrel nuts on some other handguards, which actually could not fit past this barrel extension part. Shouldn't be many, but they are around, so do be careful what handguard and barrel nut you have before you spend a lot of money trying to outfit your nice carbine kit here. So with our handguard situation squared away, let's look at our stock adapter here. So this stock adapter works with both GBB and AEG stocks. The GBB stocks are generally going to screw into the inner threading here. The AEG stocks are going to lock onto this guy and then have a screw that comes in through there. Typically, a basic AR-15 buffer tube, for example, is going to screw on okay, and I'll show you the details of this in a second. If you do have a buffer tube that is too thick and this AEG part gets in the way, you can also remove that by taking out the screw on the bottom. It's kind of another great example of how they really sort of thought of everything with this kit and made it really versatile and able to use a lot of different parts. But for demonstration, I'm gonna put this back because the buffer tubes I have work okay with it in. With a basic GBB style AR buffer tube, you can just put this guy in here and then screw it in until you get to the end basically, or however close to the end you can get. You do want this bar here to be in the downside. If you don't know about AR buffer tubes at all, you may need to look into some other GBB disassembly videos, because this is more just showing you how well this works with these guys. That's about right. You will need an AR disassembly tool in order to get this guy on nice and tight. And you have that good enough. Then we can go and stick on our basic M4 stock. You may also have some slightly fancier ones with this bigger sort of nut thing here, which needs to line up there. But it's the same basic idea, if I can line this up right. And this is actually stock, which I'm going to be using for my build. You get it. Let's see here. Let's go all the way out. In as much as we can, can't go any further, and then we go and screw this in so this nut goes there. Provides a little bit more stability here, and then again I need to use a AR tool to fit that in, but I won't do this at this second. And we have this nice cool minimalist stock here. One issue that you might face though with AAG stocks is there's a little bit of non-standardness between companies. Some companies like G&G, a lot of their stuff has a cutoff on the top here, or the socket for this isn't as long as others. I think mostly speaking, typical sort of AR buffer type AAG stocks should be okay, but some of the short ones, some of the kind of PDW style stocks or various things, you might have a little bit of trouble fitting this on, depending upon a few different factors. So do be aware that AAG stocks, if you're getting like a random AAG stock, you may or may not work. But normal buffer tube GBB style stocks should have a high rate of working well. So now that we have our stock situation sorted and our handguard situation sorted, it's time to put everything together and make it functional. So we're going to take the bolt we took out a while back, and we're going to put that guy in here because we need this to be in before we put this on. We are also at the same time going to take our grip, and we're going to put this guy on. Locked in nice there. Then we need to go and take out a screw here. This one uses a 2.5 millimeter. Most of the screws here are actually 2 millimeter. This one's a 2.5. Put that down there. And then what's going to happen here is we're going to put this on like so. And there's a few places that screw in. One, we're going to punch out the pin here and replace it with a screw. We have a couple screws in the side here, a couple screws to hold the top on, and then that screw we just took out there. Once we get everything else on, we can put that back on as well. Actually, I lied. First, we should actually take this out first, and got to take out this top pin here. If it's a fresh one, the little knurling on the pin should be on the right side, so you want to press from the left and out to the right. Should come out fairly easily. You see the knurling here is on the right side. You don't want to push it all the way through with the knurling. We're going to put that aside and go back to, we got a lot of stuff here now, and go back to our little screw bag and pull out the big long guy here. And that goes in where that pin was. Now, only one side of this has this counter boring, if you will, and that's the side we want to have with our screw side in. Now, for demonstration purposes, I put my handguard and the stock on first. You can actually put the handguard and the stock on after you do this connecting stuff, and it is a little bit easier. So don't feel the need to follow exactly the order I did things in. I just wanted to demonstrate the handguard and stock in isolation while I could move things around. It may actually be easier to put this stuff on and then put the handguard and stock on. Just FYI. But somewhat up to you. I'm going to put this in. I'm not going to tighten it too much because we want this to be able to move a little bit. Put that on. Then we're going to put on our top part here. Boom, boom, boom. Now, I think the most important point here is to make sure that this one is in here nicely. You see here's a little gap here, and there's some flex here. So we want to actually put in all the screws in kind of bit by bit and then tighten them all at the end so that we don't end up with kind of weird angles coming off of these. Now we pull out the last 4 screws in our screw bag. 2 of these are going to go up here. As mentioned, I'm going to screw these in lightly. This is recessed up here, so it does help a lot if you have a magnetic screwdriver. I'm just going to tighten these down a little bit. Make sure this is nice and relatively flush. Tighten those down a bit. Just make sure that it's not too funky. You see here we still have a little bit of play. I'll screw this down a bit. At this point, this will function pretty well. These guys are more for stability. I find you don't necessarily need them too much, but we're definitely going to put them in because we want all that stability. I want to show you how to use every last screw you're given here. These ones actually aren't countersunk, so you will have a little bit of these screw heads sticking out there. On these side ones, don't over tighten them too much. If you over tighten some of these screws, you can actually put a little bit of pressure on the bolt. It doesn't cycle quite as nicely as it should. Now, we got this. And at this point, everything should be basically done. There you go. So zooming out so you can see the whole thing here, this is what it looks like with this basic setup here. It looks pretty cool in my mind. I'm actually going to swap out this lower for one that has some internal upgrades and a different trigger. I also strongly recommend for carbine kits that you do get a charging handle of some sort, whether you have it out the left or the right, whether you have the TTI one, which also has the full auto switch, which you can do, or you have the more basic AAC one we got right here. It is definitely hugely advantageous for you to have a charging handle so that you can more easily charge it. You don't have to go like this. A little bit doable with one hand, but not something you want to be doing in the stress of battle, if you will. There you go. There is your fully assembled carbine with nice stock, nice handguard. Feels super nice. So zooming out a bit so you can see the full thing here, after assembly, this is what it looks like. Super nice, super solid. I love the lockup between the lower and the CNC upper. I love all the features like the TTC and such and so on. I'm really looking forward to running this a bunch and giving you some more detailed opinions. But I must say that testing this out on a whole bunch of different handguards and stocks and how it looks and how it feels, it's really, really cleverly put together to be able to use as many different parts as possible and have these great features like the TTC hop. Not being able to adjust the hop that easily with the carbine kit was one of the downsides of previous carbine kits, and they have fixed that really elegantly and really improved the hop up while also using the base of the stock hop up there. Everything about this kit is just really nice. It's a bit on the expensive side. It's going to be about, I think, $190 Asia price in the US and Europe. It'll be a little bit more, so it is on the pricey side, but then keep in mind that it is a full CNC upper like this. So you have to consider your own price value and what you want and whether or not this fits your needs. Overall, I think it's really good. I'm looking forward to running this a bunch, and I will give you my more impressions later. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.